Okay, so last night I was watching with a friend the 2007 film Zodiac with Mark Ruffalo, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Robert Downey Jr. about the unsolved Zodiac case in California in the late 60s. It became one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. Um, but in the Wikipedia article about that, there is a link to another case a little bit later called the Zebra Murders. Now, the Zebra murders occurred from October 1973 to April 1974 around San Francisco, and with at least 16 fatal victims and many others injured, plus culpability for possibly up to 73 murders, they rank among America's most prolific serial murders. Um, Carried out by a group, but they don't have anywhere near the sort of attention of other cases. Certainly not the same level of attention as the Zodiac case. Certainly not the same level of attention as people like Gary Ridgway, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer. So I thought that was unusual. I'd never heard of the case before, and I have an interest in criminal cases. I've been looking at the stuff for years, and I never really come across it before. So I looked up the article and then I typed it into YouTube to see what would come up. And there are only about 4 or 5 videos on YouTube about this case, maybe a little bit more. But even those don't have that many views. So clearly, this case just isn't that documented compared to other cases. Now, that wasn't the situation at the time. When this was going on in 73, 74, it put a big panic throughout the city of San Francisco and throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Something akin, I would say, to the Son of Sam murders in New York City in 1977. A sort of hysteria descended on the public, although a justified hysteria because this was going on. People would, although maybe hysteria is not the right word, rather caution. Areas where people would usually frequent suddenly became abandoned, and there was a real fear in the city. Now, what's significant about this case is that they were hate crimes permitted by committed by black supremacists against white victims. And I think this is very significant as to why this has kind of been airbrushed from history. So I'm going to just read out a bit of the article. Incidentally, a local San Francisco news network covered this on the 40th anniversary, 2013 and or 2014, and they mentioned that among the victims was the future mayor Art Agnos. He survived. But these were callous, brutal, targeted killings of white people. In one case, a woman simply doing her laundry, shot dead at point blank range. On one single night, 5 people were shot. That's what was going on. Um, and it seems to me that the reason this has kind of been collectively forgotten is liberal California wants to forget that there were racial tensions with this, and this was hate crimes against white people. So let me just read out a segment from the Wikipedia article, then elaborate a bit some of the issues around this and my things I find striking. Some people might say, "Oh, well, why are you bringing this up now, Nathan? It was 44 years ago." True, but I think some of the issues around this still apply today. Anyway, I'll just read this bit out because it's quite significant. Reaction. The murders caused widespread panic in San Francisco. People attempted to find safety in numbers whenever they went out or as much as possible avoided going out at night. In reaction, an increased police presence was ordered throughout the city. The police were baffled by the apparent lack of motive in the killings. Brutality and an apparent lack of remorse on the part of the gunmen marked the attacks. Based on what was initially known about the killings, there was a common pattern. In a hit and run shooting, the gunman would walk up to his victim, shoot the victim repeatedly at close range, and flee on foot. Another link to the shootings was the killer's preference for a 32 caliber pistol, based on the slugs recovered from the victims and the shell casings found around the crime scenes. As a result, a special task force was formed to try and solve and stop the murders, led by Detective Gus Correris and John Fatinos. San Francisco Police Chief Donald Scott assigned the Z Police radio frequency for the exclusive use. That's where the case became known as the Zebra Murders. or as they would say in the States, the zebra murders. Since the letter Z is known in common phonetic use as zebra, the group became known as the Zebra Task Force, and the murders became known as the Zebra Murders. So, just going on further down, so that wasn't the bit I wanted to. Yeah, here we go. The new wave of murders brought the city to a state of shock as people took the same precautions as they had when the first wave took place. This is the 1974 attacks. The city took a beating economically as tourists stayed away. Streets were deserted in the night, even in North Beach, a neighbourhood known to have a 7 nights a week nightlife. Police decided to take drastic measures. Inspector Gus Carreras dictated generic suspect descriptions with the best known characteristics of the killers. The SFPD sketch artist Hobart Hobby Nelson, who drew two sketches based on the descriptions. The sketches were then distributed to the media and to SFPD officers, none of whom knew the sketches were generic. Um, Although in one of these sketches, a guy by the name of Anthony Harris came forward recognizing himself, and that's actually how the case was finally solved, and four suspects were indeed charged with the crimes. San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alioto and Police Chief Donald Scott announced that police officers would begin stopping and questioning large numbers of black citizens who resembled the description of the killer, a black man with a short afro and a narrow chin. Once stopped, checked, and cleared, each citizen received a specially printed zebra check card from the officers so that they could show the police have stopped again. More than 500 black men were stopped by the first weekend the program was in operation. This provoked vocal and widespread criticism from the black community. Dr. Washington Garner, the first black member of the Police Commission, called for black people to be understanding of the exceptional circumstances. The policy faced internal criticism, with the Officers for Justice group led by Nation of Islam associate Jesse Bird viewing it as racist and unproductive. Acting on a lawsuit filed by the NAACP and the ACLU, U.S. District Judge Alfonso J. Sapporo ruled the widespread profiling of blacks to be unconstitutional and the operation was suspended. Now, here's a few issues I have with this. Um, I can understand the controversy around racial profiling, particularly in a country with the history of racial tensions and discrimination against African Americans, as the United States definitely has. No question about that. And we know from subsequent events that police forces, particularly in California, although each police force is different, I'm thinking particularly of the LAPD, have had very tense relations with the black community. And I know one of the Nation of Islam spokespeople reacted angrily, pointing out the fact that there wasn't generic profiling in the Zodiac killings. But here's the thing: in the Zodiac killings, there were there were witness descriptions, but a lot of the time the attacker had worn a mask, so it was harder to profile a Zodiac killer than it was the zebra murders. Um, the Nation of Islam denied that there was an agenda to target white people, but the witnesses all described a black man or black men as the attackers. Now, here's my question: if the police have information that a particular kind of suspect is attacking people, and this is an ongoing emergency situation where the number of attacks is getting very high. It's put a city in a state of lockdown in terms of panic. Surely the police have a responsibility to act on the information they have. So why would the SFPD at that time have stopped whites or Hispanic or Asian people? That would have just been a waste of time because they did not fit the description of the witnesses who were attacked and the survivors. This is where I think identity politics, and this still very much applies today, is just wrong. If the NAACP, and I'm aware that they have a brave history of taking on some real hardcore racism, particularly in the Deep South, but would they have a situation where the police shouldn't act on the information they have? They should just stop everyone? That's just silly. It seems to be, a waste of time. And this is still significant because to this day, racial profiling is a controversial issue. But here's my question: is racial profiling the same as racist profiling? So, for example, if you have racist white cops who are stopping black guys simply because they don't like the look of them, is that racist? I would say it probably is. But if you have police stopping a suspect because they resemble the suspect provided by witness statements, surely it makes sense to stop that person. We have similar issues here in the UK. I mean, riots have happened in London over this, and it's been a big issue under the tenure of Mayor Sadiq Khan because of the growing knife crime in London. There's a big issue about stop and search. I mean, it's controversial in not just in the United States, it's also been an issue in France and in Britain, so here in Western Europe as well. It's been an issue. But when civil rights spokespeople or when self described community leaders condemn this, where is their consideration for the relatives of these innocent white victims in this particular case? And what I find particularly problematic in the United States is the fact that you have a situation where if you had white supremacists murdering an innocent black person, as has happened. In fact, one of the last recorded lynchings was a black man who was it was barbaric. He was dragged for miles by a white supremacist gang. In fact, they were Klansmen, and he died obviously of his injuries. It was a barbaric murder that rightly got attention, but why is it the likes of CNN and other liberal media outlets ignore hate crimes when the perpetrators are black? I know there's been this defense of so-called black rage. There was a case in, I believe it was 1993, whereby a guy committed a mass shooting in, I don't know if it was New York City, it might be New Jersey, killed 8 people. The defense was black rage, that he was motivated by years of, Jim Crow laws, persecution of the black population. Now, to me, that's a very very problematic defense because if you're going to blame, if you're going to say that you're arranged by the targeting of or discrimination suffered by your community, so that gives you a right or gives you some sort of legal defense to then just shoot people of another demographic because part of their demographic is responsible for that discrimination. That seems to be a recipe for for chaos. This was in fact would have been the defence 3 years ago when the Dallas police officers were shot. Again, that suspect, black guy, killed them motivated by recent police shootings of black men. And yet, the irony there is that Dallas is one of the better police forces. They have done a lot of work to be more inclusive, to bring black officers into their ranks, to improve relations with the community. So that's the irony of it. So I'm going to round this up, but I think both the United States and to some extent Britain as well will never ever move forward on racial issues if so called community leaders don't take some responsibility and instead of always shouting racism, sometimes look at the bigger picture. I mean, this officer, the black officer, who said, just get his name, yeah, Dr. Washington Garner, the first black member of the police commission, called for blacks to be understanding of the exceptional circumstances. 16 people had died. What about their relatives? So I really have a problem with those so-called black community leaders that will always play the racism card and never ever consider that actually some black people are just criminals. They are just callous killers, just as some white people are. I mean, as a white guy, I will always condemn white racists. So why can't black community leaders condemn black racists? This is still relevant because Black Lives Matter. When do they ever condemn like the Crips or the Bloods or other black gangs? When do they ever condemn the fact that Chicago has become a war zone because of black on black crime? When? No, they're so obsessed by police brutality and white racism that they just ignore those things. I find that really problematic, and it's only going to further divisions. So, by all means, I do think there's issues around police brutality. I'm not dismissing that, but it's a selective outrage when it comes to racism. I find is only deepening the divisions, and you see this across the board. I mean, New York Times appointing Sarah Jong, and all they could come up with was muted criticism of her genocidal comments about white people, her hateful, vitriolic rants about white men, And all the New York Times could do was come up with a half-hearted apology, and they kept her on. It's those double standards that infuriate people and will only lead to further divisions, both here and in the United States. I saw a book recently, Why I No Longer Speak to White People About Race. Just imagine a white author writing Why I No Longer Speak to Black People About Race. The double standards are utterly, utterly toxic. And those of us who are against racism in general need to call it out.